Madam Mayor, I was on the point of enjoying myself, but with Councillor Heaster exhausted after his labours, I'll give up.
I do need a formal seconder to this
Mr.
emotion.
Mayor, could I possibly...
No.
I'm formally going to second the...
You a star then, thank you.
Could I please formally second the motion, Mr. Mayor?
Most certainly
Thank you.
I now have my point of personal explanation. I was directly referred to by Councillor Heaster. Well, I was supposed to do it immediately or when I can get in. I mean, there are people jumping up and down doing all kinds of things. Just to say, Madam Mayor, that I am. Councillor Heaster accused me of being exactly the same, I think, as Councillor Belton and Michael Ward. Can I just say that I am very fond of both of them, but I am not exactly the same.
The right of a reply.
Councillor Senior, would you care to respond to Councillor Heaster?
Madam Mayor, I think all has been said on this subject that really needs to be said on this subject for this evening, at least. And I would suggest that we move to a vote on the motion.
On a point of order, Madam Mayor, is this to do with the budget? Because it clearly is. It's part of our amendment. So do we have to have a named vote again? And if not, can the Chief Executive write to the Minister and say what nonsense?
The motion has been carried, and you have a minute to reflect on what you've done.
But eventually he gave in and he said, before he said, it is your question, if you've not got in 22, I can. But it's
Questions at this rate.
I know. It's still exactly 9:22.
Very important for us, because you were both there when he actually wasn't in the room.
Yeah, I don't know why he went. It's a bit different. He told me that he went back to see the people in the going.
Councillors,
Telling them that we're going to have to.
the minute has
Oh
gone.
my God.
We've got enough councillors in the chamber. Councillor Leonie Cooper.
Question number 12 to the Cabinet Member.
I do thank Councillor Cooper for the question, and how appropriate that we should follow a discussion of the Labour Party's independent report with a question about litter. I would encourage people to dispose of it through our excellent recycling service. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to highlight this very high-performing area of the Council. We've got an excellent team. They're doing better than ever. The current contract performs better than all of the previous contracts, and at a 20% saving, which the party opposite might care to note. The answer to the question is laid out here by ward, which is a curious way of doing it, but that's what you asked for. It shows us that they are all very, very different. But I would just like to highlight that we have taken a rather more assertive approach to issuing fines for littering in the last year. They've more or less quadrupled in the financial year that we're in. And guess what? Fly tipping, already at a 13-year low, has gone down by about another 30%. I think there's a connection there, and our residents like it.
Supplementary, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much to the Cabinet Member for providing the details of this. I just wondered if he could explain to me whether there's an awful lot of litter bugs that live in Northcote, or has there been a particular move to catch people for littering, as there is a particularly high number of littering prosecutions in the Northcote ward compared to all of the others. And I just wondered if he feels that the number of prosecutions for dog fouling are actually enough, because I'm sure he, as I do, and I'm sure every member here, gets an awful lot of complaints about the amount of dog fouling. Is there anything that can be done to increase activity in that area? Thank you.
I thank the Council for the supplementary question. Well, as some of my colleagues pointed out, the figure for Northcote is to do overwhelmingly with a small thing, Europe's busiest railway station. Huge footfall, pretty straightforward really. There is quite a lot of littering, and we do therefore focus on that. With great success, I must say. And in recent months, I've had a number of residents get in touch saying Northcote is looking really good. So I would say there's a balance there. There is a need, and we've responded to it. So I don't have any problem with that at all. And I think if one looks at the distribution of where the activity is in terms of FPNs, it's easy to understand when you think of what's there. Dog fouling is a different matter altogether. This is apples and pears, isn't it, really? FPNs for littering are easy enough in that you can either catch somebody dropping litter, or you can often identify the contents of a black bag. There is very often an address in there, or without giving away too many trade secrets, people would often be very surprised where their phone number ends up when they order something. The same is not true of dog fouling. It's very, very rarely witnessed, and as we all know, the deposits rarely have an address or a telephone number on them. So it's all about catching people doing it, and I agree it's an absolutely, yes, absolutely. I agree it's a problem, and we work very hard to control it. It's catching people doing it is the key.
Clapham Junction, and I would urge the Cabinet Member to continue those high-profile activities at Clapham Junction, as they really do show a distinct improvement, and we welcome that. Thank you. Will the Cabinet Member ensure those activities? Does it actually need a question mark?
Well, I thank Councillor Dawson, of course, with pleasure. I think the more assertive approach is definitely welcomed by residents. There's no doubt about that.
Hard.
I thank my colleague for this question. Tube strikes are a disgrace, quite frankly. They bring misery to Londoners, and I completely and utterly, wholeheartedly condemn them. In the second part of your question, you ask, why do you think the minority was unable to take a similarly clear line? It's because basically the RMT are their paymasters, and we're seeing them pay the money that they're getting dropping significantly.
Which ones do then?
Supplementary, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, does the Cabinet Member agree that the Labour Party does really need to be reminded that tube strikes are bad for London, they're bad for the economy and bad for growth? And also, do the Labour Party and their trade union strikers need to be reminded that if they don't want to work, there are plenty of people, hard-working people from Eastern Europe that are more than willing to take their jobs from them?
I thank my colleague for the question. I completely agree with the need to tackle the strikers. I'm very welcoming of Boris's announcement this week that we will be ordering driverless trains, and in future we will not have a small minority of people holding the city hostage.
Mr. Mayor, seconds.
This strike was potentially over, and has been resolved, was over closure of ticket offices. Now, last Saturday, I came back from Birmingham, and there was a 15-minute scrum to try and get tickets at Euston Station. So, closing ticket offices without does the Cabinet member agree that closing ticket offices without making proper alternative arrangements is not a sensible idea? And that's why the action was being taken, to try and get some sense into the policy.
Actually, this strike was about the modernisation of the service. 93% now of compared to the baseline, ticket office usage dropped by 93%. The proposals brought from the Mayor meant that we would get people out of the ticket office, where there was clearly evidence of them falling asleep behind their desks, they're so quiet, and out onto concourses and onto platforms, supporting passengers. Much better use of resources.
Thank you, Councillor. Number 14, Councillor Gibbons. Oh.
Question 14.
Your tone was distracted by the nonsense Councillor was talking there. Oh, right, yeah. A question. Question 14 to the Cabinet member.
Mr. Mayor, in absence of Mrs. Tracy, the answer is as printed, but it must be right, mustn't it, that we reduce the use of residential care for children looked after. It must be right that young people are housed in family settings as normal family settings as we all enjoyed. And it must be right that this is the way forward.
I thank the leader for the answer to Councillor Gibbons' question. Councillor Tracy isn't here. Yes, of course, on this side, we completely agree that for children, it is much, much best if they are placed in foster care rather than children's homes wherever possible. But that wasn't actually the question. The question was about the incredibly short notice staff were given of the closure of Bridge House, the very last children's home in Wandsworth, which will be closed. Does the leader agree that short notice was done on the basis of the fact it would be easier to manage and that was grossly unfair on the staff?
I don't agree at all, because the answer, in fact, the bottom last paragraph says that the function and the role of Bridge House has been under management review since 2012. The staff have known about it, and if you're suggesting, as your Councillor Gibbons suggesting, as his Councillor question implies, that they might have wanted an opportunity to do it differently themselves. Well, they had good 2 years to do it themselves differently if they wanted to.
Councillor Dawson.
Thank you. Thank you for the sort of answer, but I was just wondering if the leader would agree with me that it is not only a more cost-effective way of dealing with these very challenging placements that are needed in quite often emergency situations, but in fact it is a better focused service by going to specialist providers, and that this is another example of when looking at the changing needs, changing service models are required. And that is what this proposal delivers. Would you agree?
I entirely agree with Councillor Dawson. In fact, I mean, Councillor Dawson will know that the whole focus of children looked after has been to firstly prevent. And when prevention fails, to support as efficiently, effectively, and as kind of individually as possible, to give children as normal a family life as possible, and as appropriately as possible, and this proposal provides that.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question 15 to the Cabinet member.
Madam Mayor, I thank the Councillor for his question. As I think has been evident tonight, the opposition haven't come up with any real proposals of how they would make up this shortfall, and indeed their own so-called independent commission effectively advises that they should just accept it.
Supplementary.
Of course not. What has been clear from their conduct over the past few years in opposing the various savings that we have put forward is they wish to oppose those savings first and foremost, and as a result that money must ultimately be paid for by the council taxpayers of Wandsworth.
Second supplementary. Well, I mean, firstly, just in case anybody heckles me for time, I think I've also got a personal point of explanation wrapping in here as well. Councillor Johnson, I'm flattered that you mentioned me, although I imagine that Councillor Jacob wrote the question for you. I do want to address this issue about the £29 million of cuts, because actually we are clear on that. Our proposals tonight in the budget are offering to the electorate for the next 4 years. We are not saying to them that we will go back and undo every cut you've done over the last 4 years. Regrettable as it is, we have disagreed with a lot of them, and at the time we have voiced that, as a responsible opposition would do, and we have voiced other alternative ways of making those cuts and making savings, which you have rejected. You simplify the debate, you tot it all up, and you say £29 million, that's £5 million council tax for everyone in Wandsworth. Well, fine. If that's what you want to reduce it to, I think it's a little rich of you to claim that we and I haven't been entirely straightforward with the electorate, when actually you guys, this is the centre of your argument against us. We've put forward credible plans tonight, and all we've heard about is Brent Council.
Well, I was wondering whether there was a question coming out of that, and clearly not. But once again,
does the Cabinet member agree?
No, I don't actually agree with you. Not just on any sort of basic ideological grounds, simply because I really do find it very difficult to think of any occasions under which the opposition of the last 4 years have proposed any substantial savings, even in their current guise, with the aid of their carefully put together commission. The total savings they propose are about £3 million, and they have pet schemes to spend rather more than that money on anyway. So clearly they just haven't got the message.
Right, Councillor Hogg.
Question 16 to the Cabinet member.
I thank the Council for his question. The figures are set out in the answer, and as you'll see, there is quite a considerable underspend.
Supplementary. Thank you. I mean, I think, as you know, the social fund saved many families in their moments of crisis, whether it's bereavement or family breakdown or a sudden drop in income. It's just a bit shocking to see that now it's localised 11 months into the year. Less than 2% of the total has been spent on crisis payments. And in total, there's £750,000 left. I think this is crucial. Will the Cabinet member act to unblock the bureaucracy around these funds, and can he guarantee it will actually be spent on its intended purpose, helping local families, and not just absorbed into the Council's general funds?
Councillor Senior.
No, I'm afraid I can't offer the Councillor the reassurances that he seeks, because the fact is the schemes are very different and are operated in very different ways. The social fund provided loans in cash. This fund does not provide loans, it provides grants, but it provides them in the form of vouchers which have to be spent on specified items. So therefore it can't be spent, as we believe a number of social fund loans were being spent on things such as drink or cigarettes or other day-to-day matters of that nature. There was also substantial evidence that many applicants for the social fund not only claimed it from a DWP office, say in Wandsworth, but went to other offices and claimed the same thing again and again. So therefore, the allocation that was given to us was the effective proportionate amount of that which the DWP thought had been spent in Wandsworth. The new system is much more properly, tightly controlled, as it ought to be. And we do have evidence that when some applicants realise they're not going to receive cash, that they actually withdraw their applications. And it is not just us who are finding this out. It's not just Wandsworth being particularly hard-faced and careful about it. The same is true of many other London boroughs, including Labour-controlled ones, such as Camden, are finding they're also facing a substantial underspend on this particular area.
Is there a second supplementary? We now move to item 17. Councillor Clay.
Thank you. Question number 17 for the Cabinet member.
I thank Councillor Clay for the question. I would suggest that the party opposite pay very careful attention to the answer, because it is very positive. The number of warranted officers has doubled. It's fundamentally shifted the balance of the officers we have in the neighbourhood teams, which is constant. They're working new shift patterns as well, and so that resource, that precious resource, is much better used than it was before. And the Labour Party opposite really ought to pay attention to that and stop spreading stories to the contrary.
Supplementary. Thank you. Does the Cabinet member share my dismay that the opposition is distributing leaflets which spread worry amongst residents about what they're calling police cuts? Does he think they've deliberately misrepresented the new policing model, or that they just don't understand it?
I thank my colleague for the question. It's very difficult to answer. Is it deliberate or not? Last council meeting, Councillor Cooper had terrible trouble with the local policing model, which she kept referring to as the total policing model. Councillor Carpenter then repeated that at our recent committee meeting. So they've terrible trouble with the basic words. So it'd be no surprise if they get very confused about the numbers as well. But who knows? Is it deliberate? They should really get it straight, though, because this is just so important. They're spreading worry. They're deliberately taking things out of context. They've been told in a tweet from the borough police that they should get things in context. And the key thing here to understand is that neighbourhood policing is a constant resource. It's the same as it was in 2010, essentially. And those changes that there have been, which you describe as cuts, have been centralisations of certain functions which make very little difference to anybody at a sort of frontline level. And I give one example, a very serious example, but it's a good one. The way in which rape is dealt with across London has been centralised, so instead of every borough having its own rape investigation team, which thankfully is a very low volume crime, it's now done centrally, and that makes an awful lot of sense because the linkages can be identified and the expertise is all in one place centrally. So that gets presented as a cut by you guys. It is nothing of the sort. It's a rationalisation and it makes an awful lot of sense, and you really must get this straight because it's deeply irresponsible to be presenting things as otherwise.
Thank you very much. And the first thing I'd like to do is completely refute that we've made any statements saying that services have been cut in relation to rape. In relation to rape, I have never said that, nor has anyone else on this side. However, my question relating to your answer, you say in your second paragraph that in the region of 50 police constables in the teams across the borough. Surely you'd agree that a sergeant and 2 PCs per ward in the borough equals 60, adding in your own figure of the number of PCSOs makes a complement previously of 190 in the safer neighbourhood teams. So therefore you must agree that your figure of 149, adding up your 2 new figures of constables plus the much reduced number of PCSOs, is 41 fewer people on the street. And it is, and I'm afraid it's not us that's spreading rumours about the number of PCSOs and PCs who are no longer available in wards. That is members of the public coming to us and drawing it to our attention. You need to get out more. You need to go and visit your safer neighbourhood team and hear what they have to say.
Well, Councillor Cooper, please know I was talking to mine just a couple of days ago. I do get out, and I understand it perfectly, unlike you. The numbers are constant. You have misunderstood the numbers here. It is essentially 150, very close to 150 in 2010, and very close to 150 now. What has changed is they are now distributed much more flexibly. So sure, in Wandsworth Common, for example, in Wandsworth Common, a low crime ward, which doesn't have as high a demand as, for argument's sake, Tooting, we now have a much more sensible distribution of that resource. Now, I know that the party opposite hasn't a clue about sensible, efficient distribution of resources, but that is exactly what this... I'm speaking. That is exactly what this plan, which you can't even get the name right of, is all about. It is a much more sensible distribution of resources, and already crime figures are falling, 12% down to December, which is very, very encouraging. And instead of pandering to anyone who does come to you and saying, oh, it's awful, you should do the responsible thing and you should explain to them what a positive thing the local policing model is, because it is.
We now move to item 18. Now, Councillor Randall is not here.
On behalf of Councillor Randall, question 18 to the Cabinet Member.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Thomas for asking Councillor Randall's question. I think the answer is quite specific, and but I would point out that there are other hospitals in the area which admit people for surgery other than St Helier and those which go to St George's in the borough, and they include Charing Cross, Kingston, Chelsea and Westminster and St Thomas's.
The number of planned admissions of Wandsworth residents at St Helier and Epsom, perhaps not a surprise. However, I do note that the number of emergency admissions for St George's Hospital is some 16,000. Again, perhaps not too surprising, but we do need to do everything we can to reduce the number of emergency admissions. Can the Cabinet member tell me if this is going to be a focus for Wandsworth in its plans for taking forward the Better Care Fund?
I thank the councillor for his question, and the answer is yes.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet member agree that perhaps Councillor Randall's question has fallen rather flat and most people would prefer to go to St George's than St Helier's? And also, does he agree with me that actually Jeremy Hunt is getting things right and that we should be supporting centres of excellence where consultants, top quality consultants, are on duty 24/7 rather than having a hodgepodge of rather more local hospitals who can't cope with clinical crises?
Answering the various questions, I can understand why people wouldn't necessarily want to go to St Helier, but I would say that they do provide some specific services which are not available at St George's and elsewhere, and are not available even at Epsom Hospital. So they do have some specific specialisations, so I can imagine why people might need to go there, and they go there from a very wide catchment area. And I do take on board the comments concerning the Secretary of State and the work he's trying to do to encourage the number of emergency admissions to go down and for more people to be using GP practices. And we're working very closely with the Clinical Commissioning Group here in Wandsworth to make sure that the GP practices provide proper services which can, and people who need to see a doctor can see them as soon as possible.
Thank you. The time for the 45 minutes for questions have elapsed, and now we return to items for decision. Report number 1, and I will ask the Council to approve the recommendations on each paragraph. So paragraph 1 is for decision. Is this approved? Agreed on both sides. Paragraph 2 for decision. Is that approved? Agreed on both sides. Paragraph 3 is for decision. Is that approved on both sides? As paragraph 4, is that approved? Agreed on both sides. Paragraph 5, is that approved? Paragraph 6, is this approved on both sides? Yes, I know the, no, but I know. I understand. Paragraph 8 is for decision. Is that approved, both sides? And then paragraph 9 is for decision. Is that approved? Brilliant. Now, the whips have agreed that the next debates will be on item 17, the motion on Save Our Streets, High Streets, followed by paragraph 3 of report number 3 on the Winstanley, York Road and Alton Estates. So I now call on Councillor Leonie Cooper to formally move and Councillor Osborne to second the motion.
Formally. On behalf of Councillor Randall, yes, formally.
Okay, thank you. Now, there is also an amendment to this motion that has been circulated in the Chamber. Can I ask Councillors Cousin and Steiner to move and second that amendment?
And now there is a further amendment to be moved by Councillor Osborne.
Correct. We have another further amendment which is going to be moved by Councillor
Osborne.
And seconded by Councillor Leonie Cooper.
Correct. Just a very small amendment to make a minor adjustment in the wording. this is in the context of what I have to say are, I think, constructive amendments from the majority party. And just a small change to add, if I may read it out, is that? Add after the words payday lenders and explore using Article 4 planning directions to give councillors a greater say on development and the location of gambling outlets.
Madam Mayor, if it would help, because I'm aware Councillor Maxwell Scott isn't here, if we could do a deal and we could remove the split infinitive that's in the final paragraph, would it help if we could incorporate the wording of Councillor Osborne's into our amendment and do it that way? And then we can jiggle about with who proposes and seconds, if that's acceptable. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'd like to start off by welcoming this motion and thanking the Labour Party for putting it down. Obviously, there is some tinkering with the wording in our motion, but I think fundamentally it represents what is a shared, bipartisan support for our town centres and for their continued success and development. I have often said, I'm not sure if I've ever said it in this chamber particularly, but I've often said elsewhere, that congratulations to our town centres is partly due to Councillor Belton, and we spent quite a long time talking about what Councillor Belton did or didn't do in the 70s when he was involved in the leadership of his council. But one of the things I'm aware that, or have been told he was responsible for, was the very first town centre policy that this council set up then. He certainly never disputed that whenever I've given him credit for it, and he's not doing it now, so I'm assuming he's happy to take credit for that. It showed, I think, remarkable foresight on Councillor Belton's behalf to establish that policy, which has continued ever since, and I think has played a part under the last years of a Labour administration and 30-plus years of our administration, played its part in making Wandsworth an incredibly vibrant borough that's made up of distinct areas, each of which have their own attractions and each of which have their own charms. But I think that foresight, and I'm sure Councillor Belton would be the first to accept, that foresight would also have included an element and an understanding that things change, that town centres evolve, that the nature of retail is very different. And if I think back to when I first moved to Wandsworth in the mid-90s, and my local town centre of Clapham Junction, and think of what Northcote Road was, I suspect it would be seen with horror by the people who now love and speak up for Northcote Road. I suspect very few of them would have been regulars in the dub vendor, which pounded out its beats at the end of Northcote Road for all and sundry to hear, and would wonder how on earth they could ever buy a pram and then have a latte in peace, listening to the reggae sounds that emanated from that establishment. But of course, Northcote Road then played its part as a successful town centre, as it does now. It may not be to everyone's taste, but that's the wonderful thing about Wandsworth. Each of our town centres has its different charms and has its unique attractions. And I do wonder, if we were starting now, would we continue and would we have taken the same path? One of the things that's always surprised me is how long we've accepted the inequality that's inherent in our town centres. It seems to me strange that we consider the equality of provision between town centres something that we've protected and kept for so long, when you have our smallest town centre, Balham, having exactly the same resource as the sprawling town centres and diverse town centres of Clapham Junction and Tooting, or having exactly the same resource as the town centres of Wandsworth and Putney, which have, of course, significant parts of their square footage under the control of a mall, of a shopping mall, where the traders in there are already paying their service charges for many of the services that they receive. And that, of course, doesn't even take into account the emergent secondary parades and town centres that we're seeing develop around the borough. Those secondary parades that, at the moment, through the accidents of geography, are developing, are enhancing their offer, are themselves becoming attractors to people who are moving to the area or moving within the area. But because they're outside a line that was drawn on a map and has been changed remarkably little in the interceding 40 or so years since the policy was evolved, don't benefit directly from a town centre manager. And the challenge has changed too. This motion, hopefully is amended, will reflect that we are now seeing payday lenders which didn't exist back in the 70s. We are seeing bookies turning up, which are an unwelcome addition to a vibrant town centre. And I think our best defence to those challenges is to have a vibrant town centre. It's what attracted me to the area in the mid-90s. I know it's what's attracted many of my colleagues and many of my friends who've moved to this area. It's the town centres that make Wandsworth great, and it's the town centres we want to protect. Councillor Belton mentioned Grimsby somewhat dismissively earlier, and I was somewhat offended because it is my hometown and I love it dearly. And of course it is my right to be negative about Grimsby because it is actually truly an awful place and not one I would recommend anyone ever went to. But one of the reasons it is an awful place is that when you go there and when you look at what has happened, is that the council has failed to adapt, it's failed to evolve, it's failed to recognise that the world is changing around it. So when it sees a town centre struggling, it decides, well, what we'll do is build a bigger town centre, and then wonder why those units are empty. Then it will think, well, obviously we need something else, so what we'll do is build a big retail park and put a massive Tesco extra that everyone now goes to, and then leaves the town centre even emptier, and then scratch their head and wonder what's wrong, and then start to develop plans for an even bigger shopping mall in the town centre that will fail further. That's a trap that we will not fall into because we've always resisted these big developments, because we've always protected our town centres. And I'm pleased that tonight we will be seeing an example of a council that is combined in its belief that we need to protect those town centres further still, and we need to evolve and develop them for the challenges that lie ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Leonie Cooper.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I have a slight sense of déjà vu because it's about 2 minutes to 10, and I think this might be our last debate, and I seem for some reason to be the person who's last speaking in it. So I've thrown away all my speech that revolved around talking about the differences between the town centres, because I think Councillor Cousins has touched on some of that. We're minded very much to accept your amendment, as I think we indicated, and I think you've said that you'll accept our second one. So I think hopefully everyone understands now that we are going to be voting on the motion as amended. I know that if Councillor Randall was here, I just want to briefly say one of the things that she would have said, as someone who's been very involved in the Tooting Town Centre partnership and has worked very closely with the Tooting Town Centre manager, who's an absolute star. Tooting is a very difficult town centre. I think we would all recognise that, and the work that has been put in by that town centre manager has been tremendous in terms of attracting shops to that area and maintaining that town centre and bringing it up. And over the last few years, Balham has really improved as well. At one point, Balham Market was empty, and compared to the Northcote Road Market, it wasn't anywhere near as vibrant. So I think, in sum, what I'm saying is that the town centres have changed, also the residents in the borough have changed, and also our powers as a council have changed around planning and what we can do in the high streets, and that's why the second amendment is something that we were keen to bring in, because we feel it's necessary to stop the proliferation of the payday lenders and the gambling outlets, because that's not really something that we want inches away in some cases from local schools. It's most inappropriate. So maintaining the diversity of our town centres is fantastic. Putney is not like Clapham Junction, but also maintaining the diversity within our town centres is something that we're really keen to see. And we think that that principle is as important as allowing the 1,000 flowers to bloom across the Wandsworth that are our town centres, and a big thanks is due to the town centre managers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Now, as we have two amendments, can we agree to tie in to that one amendment? I just want to clear the air. So I'm going to put that amendment to the vote. So it is agreed.
Yeah.
Right. So gosh, I can't believe it. Now the next item is the executive report, number. Is that agreed?
Yes.
Yeah, fine, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So now, the next item is executive.
Okay, right. The next item is executive report number 2. I call on the leader to move reception of that report. Thank you, Councillor. Is that agreed?
Okay. Education, Children's Services, OSC.
I'm confused now. Paragraph 1 is for information. Are you both agreed? Absolutely. Paragraph 2 is for information, but you want to vote against it. I'm with you. So those for the paragraph in support of Bridge House. Those against? The motion is carried.
Yeah, 36.
3611.
34, sorry.
3411. I'm getting different numbers in my ear. Right, now we move to the paragraph 3. This is agreed. Is that for information? Is that agreed? Environment, culture and community safety. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Paragraphs 4 and 5 are for information. Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Paragraph 6 for information. And paragraph 7.
We now return to Executive Report number 3, Strategic Planning and Transportation. Councillor King, paragraph. Adult and we have paragraph 3, this is for housing. Is this for information?
Paragraphs 3 and 4, Madam Mayor.
Right, is that agreed? Brilliant. Finance and Corporate Resources, Councillor Senior.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Paragraph 5 is for information. Paragraph 6 is for information.
Agreed.
And paragraph 7 is for information. Same numbers?
Happy with it? Yep. Okay, same numbers. Health and Wellbeing Board.
Move the reception of report number 4. Paragraph 1 is for information. Paragraph 2 is for information.
Madam Mayor, I move the Planning Applications Committee report number 5. Paragraph 1 is for information. Paragraph 2 is for information. And paragraph 3 is for information. That concludes the report. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, report number 6, to move reception of report number 6 and paragraph 1 for information.
Funds. Shall I read that again, or did you? That's agreed, so that's that. Thank you very much, councillors. That concludes the business for tonight's meeting, and good evening. Sure, blimey.